Tonight on This Week in Politics, perspective about the election we've just been through and what the next year will look like, not only in Washington, but around our region. We are joined tonight by Dakota News Now political analyst Dr. Jeff Stein, who for more than a decade has been covering politics for us, in addition to his decades of radio and television work. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Allen. Thank you for being with us tonight. We began our conversation with Dr. Stein broadly by asking him what the takeaway is from the November 3rd election.
I think, Brian, the lesson of 2020 is the fact that elections have been close and they are going to get closer. And I think it's because so many people have disassociated themselves with either the Democrat or Republican parties. You have plenty of partisans on each end of the spectrum, but as those who felt that they were more independent or more moderate have left the official party ranks, you have two things happening. One, the candidates determined in primaries for each party wind up being pulled to the sides of the political spectrum. Democrats further to the left, Republicans further to the right. And then that means the voting populace feels even less inclined to be a partisan. And what it means is those in the muddy middle, if they're sort of not happy with how things are going, they'll vote for the other major party because in their minds there are only the two. And that's what leads to the second point, this wild swing in governance, Republican to Democrat to Republican to Democrat, because those folks like me in the muddy middle, we make our changes every 2, 4, 8 years because we don't have that political allegiance. And that means much more volatility in the electorate.
Do we know who made the difference this time around voter-wise? Conventional wisdom says that it was suburban moms. Is that right?
The people I've talked to have said suburban moms have actually turned out more for Trump than they did 4 years ago. I really think it is a function of more people being involved in 2020 overall, and more of them showed up on the Democrat side. People who apparently study these things tell me that a lot of Democrats sat home 4 years ago because they didn't like Hillary Clinton. They didn't think that she was the best choice. For whatever reason, they just sat at home. Those people turned out much more in 2020, not so much because they liked Donald Trump or that they liked Joe Biden. It's because they didn't like Donald Trump. 2 elections in a row now on the presidential level, Brian, we have had people vote, not necessarily because they were passionate for someone, but passionate against someone. I would tell you that 2016, a lot of Trump voters, they may have liked him, but they hated her. Those people, though, were motivated to vote for him again for consistency. But then on the other side, you had all these Democrats who sat home 4 years ago and said, we can't let that happen again. We'll vote for whoever has the D by their name.
Specific to the Democratic Party here for a second, does the president-elect have a problem come January? Because there's the moderate wing of the party, and there is the growing progressive wing, and it's that wing that seems to be taking a little bit more flight right now, making sure that they want their concerns met and their voices heard by this administration, by a president that's of the same party, but still potentially some different priorities.
I think what Joe Biden did, Brian, to get the nomination was in essence build a coalition government like you see in other nations that have multiple parties. In other words, if you recall going into Super Tuesday, there was great fear that Bernie Sanders was going to steamroll to the nomination. And so you saw people like Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, others fall by the wayside, pack their tents before Super Tuesday, endorse Biden. It was a Stop Sanders movement. All right, so then once Biden gets enough delegates, he has to try to make peace with the Sanders wing of the party. So he built, in essence, a lot of little coalitions, a quilt, if you will. That's great to get elected. But everybody who's part of that patchwork now wants something. And you've heard folks in the more progressive side say, our votes come at a price. We want what we want, and that you said, Mr. Biden, that you would be providing. So far, the things he has said haven't really riled anyone. He hasn't picked any cabinet nominees that would offend and therefore not be confirmed by the Senate. But I really think this is a tinderbox. I think that those on the progressive side, those far to the left, they're not going to be happy unless they get what they thought they had coming to them. I think Biden said a lot of things to get the nomination and then get the election, and that's not his normal wheelhouse with regard to his viewpoints for governing. My prediction is you're going to have a President Biden, if that is how it all turns out, who's going to govern much more moderately than many people in his own party thought he might. And that's where, especially with a very thin U.S. majority or a Democrat majority in the U.S. House, that's where you're going to start seeing some cracks in that coalition, in the foundation.
Yeah, let's talk about Congress here for a second. Anyone who knows the political history of the president-elect knows that his history mainly lies in the United States Senate, his ability to get things done in there, to cut deals, to get things passed. He is obviously then no stranger to the Republican Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. They have a history. Does the history between those two help a Biden administration or hurt a Biden administration?
In some respects, I'll answer that after the Georgia runoff election. Because if, in fact, Republicans have a 52-48 majority in the U.S. Senate, and that would be sweeping both of those seats, Biden is going to need to handle himself differently than if it's even 51-49, or to some degree the dreaded 50-50 tie that is also very possible, because again, it all has to do with leverage, doesn't it? As you perceptively suggested in the question, when Barack Obama needed to get something done on Capitol Hill, he sent Joe Biden because Joe was the emissary who had worked with these people, etc. Well, it's very different when you are the president. I don't see Kamala Harris playing the same role as vice president with regard to arm twisting in the Congress that Joe Biden did when he was vice president, for example. The other thing to keep in mind is we talk about Biden's long history, and yes, you're right, he has a history with McConnell. But there's a very large number of people in both the Senate and the House who never served at the same time as Joe Biden. So in other words, when he goes to Capitol Hill, he didn't swear in these people as vice president, therefore president of the Senate. Things have changed hands enough over the course of the last 4 years. Then you add the 8 years when he was vice president. That's a 12-year span. How many people have changed over? And the answer is an awful lot of them. So it's not going to be old Joe sitting down with Mitch in exactly the way that it was before.
And welcome back to This Week in Politics here on KSFY. We continue our discussion tonight with Dakota News Now political analyst Dr. Jeff Stein. On November 3rd, South Dakota voters approved both medicinal and recreational marijuana for legal use. It marks the first time a state has approved both of these ideas in the same election. And I asked Dr. Stein what he makes of a conservative Midwestern state making such a milestone.
I think what it shows is that South Dakotans, at least as I understand them to be from my experience, are a pretty independent lot. Yes, it may be a conservative state, but it's more of the freedom-loving, leave me alone, liberty first kind of thing. And you've seen that in reaction to suggestions that there be greater restrictions due to COVID-19, mask mandates, et cetera. They don't work in a lot of these states because the people have a, I hate to say libertarian streak because that suggests a political affiliation. But that's really what you're talking about here. And it has a much greater chance of living on with a Biden administration, because keep in mind, in federal law, marijuana possession and recreational use is still not legal. According to federal law, it just hasn't been enforced. A second Trump administration might have meant something different. But I think the direct answer to your question is, folks in South Dakota just kind of want government and people to leave them alone when it has to do what goes on inside the four walls of their house.
You touched on COVID there for a second, and this is a question that I wanted to ask you specific to where you are. You're coming to us right now from Waterloo, Iowa. About a week and a half ago, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds finally put into place a form of a mask mandate, given the fact that COVID-19 numbers in that state have exploded in recent weeks. It wasn't that long ago that she said the idea of a mask mandate was something to do just to feel good. What specifically changed for her? Was this a public health decision? Was this a political decision? Was it both? Why did she finally say, okay, let's mask up?
If it was purely political, Brian, she would have not issued the mandate. I think that because then it looks like a flip-flop, right? I think it was a response to public health officials and the fact that the White House task force kept saying that Iowa's counties were bright red as hot spots. I don't think at this point a mask mandate makes any difference, and here's why. We've gotten to the point of critical mass with regard to the wearing of masks. People who are going to wear them are going to wear them. And I think you're up to that 90-some% of people who wear them regardless. That last percent, it doesn't matter if you have a mask mandate. There's a certain percentage who just says, I'm not going to wear a mask. I don't believe in it, whatever the reason. So the governor's position here in Iowa has generally been that this is an unenforceable law, a mandate. And it is largely unenforceable. The idea is to try to modify behavior. So I think she did it as a sign of saying, look, this is really getting serious. We're going to wind up crippling our healthcare system. So asking nicely, it's almost and she points out that she's a proud grandmother. So I'm not being disparaging when I say it's almost like the grandmother who says, don't do that, don't do that. And then by the third time, you have to put the hammer down a little stronger. She'd asked nicely, and apparently the numbers kept going up. So I think it was public health, but again, I don't think behavior is going to change an awful lot.
Dr. Stein, what happens to Donald Trump after he leaves the White House? Does he remain the leader of the Republican Party? Does he remain a political force? Or once he leaves 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, does his importance diminish?
Those who are party pros would love to think that it's the latter, that once he leaves, he goes into retirement and keeps a low profile and they get control of their party back. Because to a very large degree, Donald Trump took over the Republican Party. And the best analogy I have for those of us of a certain age is it's when Rodney Dangerfield became a member of the Bushwood Country Club in the movie Caddyshack. He just upset everything. And that's what Donald Trump did. The Republican Party was his Bushwood. Now, if he, on his way out of office, says, I hereby declare my candidacy for president for 2024, you are going to find a Republican Party that is frozen. There are a lot of people who are already queuing up for 2024. They've been coming to Iowa to help congressional candidates and Senate candidates this cycle because they wanted people in Iowa to know them. And so the thought was if Trump wins, he's got another term, it's an open seat in 2024. The thought was if Trump loses, he certainly won't try to pull a Grover Cleveland. So again, open seat in 2024. He's been very public about saying, I'll just run again. I already won in 2020 and now this will validate it. If he does declare, money gets frozen, supporters get frozen, political activists get frozen because they don't want to start working for somebody who might run against Trump in the event that he gets the nomination and holds a grudge. So it's a fascinating situation. The trick is, does he make that declaration or does he do the dance as he did in 2012? Remember when he was talking about running, holding a news conference then to say he wasn't going to run. The hot rumor is that he's looking at some kind of broadcast career, going back to that. Maybe it's daytime talk radio. Maybe it's an evening program on one of these burgeoning cable operations. And obviously, if he declares he's running for anything, nobody's going to put him on the air. But think about the situation where you've got a Donald Trump who knows the media, who says, I want an hour of prime time on cable television every night, 2 or 3 hours weekdays on talk radio. That is going to give him the stage that he wants, and it is going to prevent the Republican Party, the old party pros, from taking their party back, which they desperately want to do. And you can see that by the very small number of them who supported him in this recount effort.
Dr. Stein, do you hear anything about our governor, Kristi Noem, and 2024?
A lot. I mean, she paid Iowa 3 visits, I believe, in a very short period of time after her very national public coming out party to some degree at the Independence Day festivities at Mount Rushmore. I mean, you don't go to the Pottawatomie County Central Committee meeting You don't get on the Trump 2020 bus tour in the Quad Cities, then drive to Waterloo. You don't do that sort of thing just because you want to see President Trump reelected. She was clearly trying to capitalize by coming to Iowa. That's not a criticism because Senator Tim Scott did it, Senator Tom Cotton did it. There's a whole host of others who came to Iowa. So we do hear a lot about her. We hear a lot of very positive things about the demeanor that she has expressed during, from what we see here and on the national stage, and that she has expressed during the COVID situation. There's an awful lot of talk about her in a different way than some of the others. I mean, for example, Nikki Haley, female, past governor, now past UN ambassador, but your governor has a very different reputation and has steered the state through this crisis. Again, that's a high-profile name we're watching here in the state of Iowa, to be sure.
Welcome back to This Week in Politics here on KSFY. On Wednesday, President-elect Joe Biden made a national Thanksgiving address, looking ahead to what he says his administration will be focused on in its early days when he becomes president in January. We leave you tonight with a bit of that speech. I'm Brian Allen, hoping you have had a good holiday weekend. And as always, from all of us to all of you, good night now from Courthouse Square.
This is the moment where we need to steel our spines, redouble our efforts, and recommit ourselves to the fight. Let's remember, we're all in this together. Sounds trite to say it, but we're all in this together.